Hello, Eric. My name is Tom Commeine, President of Professional Speakers Association Belgium, PSA, and I have the honor today to talk with Eric Bauwelinck, one of our esteemed members of PSA since several years. And for all our speakers listening to this, he's a real professional, not just in speaking, but also in everything that has to do with it. I'll give you the floor, Eric, to introduce yourself and what you're doing on a daily basis.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on board, Tom. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this interview. My background is basically that of a conference interpreter. So in the past 30 years, actually between 1990 and 2020, I have been working behind the screens as a conference interpreter, translating over, and I've made the count, 30 years times 100 meetings on average every year, times 10 speakers on average for every meeting. That means 30,000 speakers that I have interpreted in the past 30 years. So you can imagine how many speakers and presenters I have seen in those past decades. And that is basically also my background as conference interpreter. And today it is my main topic for speaking, which is language and also psycholinguistics, which I will gladly explain later on. Now, since 2020, my main job has actually shifted from conference interpreter in the background to digital stage manager during the onboarding of the international multilingual meetings. And that is often when international political meetings or scientific meetings, webinars are being organized, the so-called virtual speaking room, where I introduce also these speakers, where I sound check the interpreters, very important, the audio feed. But there you have it. That's my history. And that is what I'm doing today in the professional speaking business. So actually, it's a bit of a side channel, but it's also what we call applied language and speaking.
Yes, we'll go about speaker business in a moment. I'm just curious. So, does it mean you have your own company at the moment? How big is your company? How should we see it? If people are listening, when should they contact you, and why should they contact your company? Can you give us some more detail on that?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. So I'm also the owner and founder of Master Voice, specialized in simultaneous interpreting. And simultaneous interpreting, of course, is where we have international representatives who represent a certain country, but also a certain expertise, and where we are asked to provide the simultaneous interpreting. Now, to put this clearly, in a international meeting, like for instance, a video call like this one, you would have a language channel and you would be able to select French, English, German, Spanish, or whatever language spoken throughout the world. And this is the service we actually provide. This is also the business that I own and run in my capacity as a CEO.
Okay, interesting. May I ask what types of clients usually you work with?
Well, basically, we have the corporate market of big multinational companies, often also stock rated. So these companies have international subsidiaries, and they often talk to international stakeholders and representatives. So that is one pillar of our client portfolio, the international corporations. And a second one is institutions, governments, and associations, because they, of course, also rely on interpreters to participate in the international dialogue with their international stakeholders. So the corporate and institutional clients, those are the two main personas of organizations that we work for with simultaneous interpretation.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And what are your main challenges as a company in that area at the moment?
A very good question. It won't come as a surprise that since 2020, when we saw the increase of online meetings, and which now we see the shift in hybrid meetings and the return to on-site with connected rooms, the main challenge is clearly connectivity. Connectivity can be network connectivity, or it can be audio-visual connectivity. We see this as a main channel because all of a sudden, instead of being the meeting being prepared by audiovisual technical teams, now it's everyone for themselves. They have to make sure that they are well prepared, well connected, and also with a clear audio feed. So suddenly, all of a sudden, this becomes an individual responsibility in our sector. This goes both for conference interpreters, speakers, and presenters alike. So they all have the shared responsibility to make sure that the connectivity works well, and connectivity is and remains the challenge number one. Of course, we have measures in place to make sure that we don't witness disasters. So dry runs and connectivity tests and sound checks, as we did prior to this interview, are absolutely indispensable to avoid issues with connectivity, audio, and video.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And maybe enlighten us. You got more than 30 years experience in this business. How did you end up in this business? And what has fascinated you to stay in this business for over more than 30 years? Because I can imagine in 30 years' time, lots have changed.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Now, going back in time, I was always fascinated by language. So this already started in primary school when I had my first lessons, French. I was actually intrigued by experiencing that you can express yourself in another code, expressing another reality, reproducing another reality using your own voice with a different code and with a different language. And then, of course, during my secondary school experience, I also had the pleasure to have in-depth training in French, German, and English. And then the choice for the higher education was clear. I went to a school specialized in conference interpreting in French, English, and German. And there I met 3 interpreters who were in the field, so to say. So one of them was active for NATO. The other teacher was working for the United Nations, and the third one for the Belgian Senate. So they actually told me, and they shared their expertise. So they told me what the profession is about. And my first experience in an interpreting booth, that's where I saw the light and where I said, this is it. This is for me. I want to continue with this, working as a conference interpreter. So that is how I came into the industry. And in the past 30 years, a lot has changed. What has not changed, and now we come to a, let's say, a common point of the Professional Speaker Association, is that the speakers and the presenters on stage, they still need to influence their audience. They still need to get across a message that is clear, that is relevant for their audience, and that is also inspiring. This is something that has never changed, and that had also inspired me. And this is why I also wanted to be part of a professional organization in professional speaking, the PSA, where we have this interview right now.
That's most interesting. We'll come to that topic in a moment. But from what you were saying, and in my, I have 2 children. They are already age 23 and 21, but they also have nephews and so on. And what I notice with younger people is languages are not as important seen anymore as in when we were young. My mother always said, make sure you speak a lot of languages because the knowledge of languages is so important later on in your life. What would you say to young people, 8, 10, 12 years old, about the importance of languages that you have experienced?
Well, first of all, that is a very good question. Communication is key in business today. So whatever job you will do in later life, you will always need communication skills. And communication skills, this means not only in one language, but preferably also English as a lingua franca, and possibly also other foreign languages, depending on the company where you land. But communication and language will always be part of the basic skills in any job you will do later on. This is, by the way, also why most trained translators and interpreters basically start working for international companies in a communication role because of their language skills. So only a few of them, a small percentage, lands in the language industry where they start working as a translator or interpreter, but having these core language and communication skills remains key for everyone in any type of business nowadays.
Okay. So would you agree with me that the knowledge of multiple languages enhances your opportunity for a better career?
Yes, but we have actually now landed at a very interesting point. Even if you're, let's say, if you have enough experience and you have had the training to express yourself in another language, as an international speaker, the best way to share your expertise and knowledge is still to express yourself in your native language, in your mother language, because this is where it comes from, the source, and where you have the best skills, the best arguments, and the best possible expertise against other speakers who will use their first native language. And then, of course, you have the support of the professional interpreters to back that up in different languages for international audiences. So speaking your own native language is the best way to give the best of yourself as professional speaker, but also as professional interpreter, for that matter.
Okay, that's an interesting take on things. Does that also have to do with the evolution of AI on public speaking?
Well, I knew this topic would be brought forward at some point in time during this interview. And first of all, AI, without any doubt, will and is already revolutionizing our society as we speak, also the world of business. But of course, you have the world of consumers, you have the business to business, where AI was already impacting the market for a long time, even before ChatGPT. But now, of course, you also have the business to corporate, which is our main audience. And there, the human validation is extremely important because however impressive the results are to use AI also in our language industry, it is a magnificent support also for subtitling, speech to text. Nowadays also text to speech, but it comes with a disclaimer because it contains critical errors. And if you work in an environment, I have mentioned the two types of clients we work for with simultaneous interpreting. So corporate multinational organizations and international associations, institutions, and governments. Believe you me, it is extremely important that human validation is there to authenticate that the original message comes across, interpreted by a human who has the mission and the business ethics to faithfully reproduce everything completely and faithfully in the target language. So this is where I want to make a distinction between AI and human interpreting. There will be a spillover effect where AI will be an extremely useful tool to support meetings for B2B, business to consumer. It will be a great aid and a great support, but in the context and environment where you need, for instance, political and diplomatic environments, where you absolutely need this human validation to be absolutely certain that whatever you say will be interpreted completely and faithfully in all details. That is where the human interpretation comes in. That is where human intelligence and human validation will remain important.
Okay, that's a very interesting view on the AI and a good explanation why people still will be needed in the aspect of translation, because we're not yet there. If I'm hearing you, that the machines will take over everything. And now we come to the topic of professional speakers and the Professional Speakers Association here in Belgium. You have a vast experience with speakers on stage in your career of plus 30 years. What would be your best advice to speakers in the first place?
Well, you already heard a few tips that I shared. So speaking in your native language, unless of course you have a very good command of English as international language, but remember that global English is not the same as global business. So that's important to bear in mind. So if you are confident that you can bring your message across in English as a lingua franca, that is fine and perfect. And of course, today there is also a much higher tolerance towards what we call global English instead of other languages who have much more a degree of sensitivity to the nuances and the different dialects in your voice when you speak another language. But again, what remains is the ability and the core skill to bring an inspiring story and an inspiring message. And this is also something speakers, and especially young speakers, need to work on, but it has to come from within. It has to come from the source. There is no need copying or imitating other speakers, unless, of course, you can reproduce a skill that you already have in yourself inherently, intrinsically, and that you can use as an extra tool to express yourself and to bring your own story. So in summary, bring your own message, bring it in an authentic way where you feel comfortable with, that expresses yourself, your own convictions, that brings your own stories, and bring that all together in a clear and inspiring story on stage. And this is basically nothing revolutionary, but it's the same basic recommendation I can give to every speaker, even if they heard this 100 times. This is also my experience. Remain authentic, be yourself, and make sure that you bring your own inspiring story, and make sure you believe in your own story before you deliver it to an audience. Also very important.
Well, you're aware that lots of the members of PSA Belgium enjoy going on stage. You yourself now, or more since 2020, you say you're more into the stage management part of the business yourself. As a stage manager, can you tell me something more about being a stage manager? What is the role of a stage manager? What exactly do you contribute to the experience? Can you talk some more about that?
Okay, I will first tell you what a stage manager is not, and that's a keynote speaker or a moderator for the entire meeting. A digital stage manager is particularly important during what we call the onboarding stage, so the virtual speaker room before the show goes live. When the speakers are being introduced, they're testing their presentations. They want to make sure that they are well seen, well heard. So the audiovisual checks are very important in that stage. Also, we onboard the interpreters, we sound check the interpreters, we make sure that all channels have been preset, and we also give general guidelines and recommendations to the speakers to take into account the fact that they're being interpreted for an international audience. And one of the first recommendations will be to use a microphone, and we need to use diplomacy to convince people that their voice is key in every presentation. So this is where we step in to support them in the best possible way so that their message can be reliably relayed by the interpreters to their audience. So this in summary, is what we do during the onboarding stage. It's onboarding and welcoming presenters, meeting facilitators, and interpreters, and giving guidelines on the recommended use of simultaneous interpreting and the factors that can influence and impact their performance.
Okay. Then a logical next step is before the speaker goes on stage, what would you advise to a speaker when he goes to speak for an international audience?
Well, you guessed it. First of all, use your best language you are proficient in. So that would be your native language. And if that is not part of the working languages, then of course, you should be proficient in one of the main conference languages. But if you are in a multilingual setting with 3, 4, 5, or even more languages, then you will be best armed and best prepared if you deliver your message, if you deliver your presentation in your own native language, supported by interpreters. And otherwise, do make sure that your audio is well set up, because I've seen so many speakers who have an interesting and inspiring story, and half of the message doesn't come across because of technical reasons. And this is basically always regretful, because then they didn't get the chance to deliver their message fully. And I believe one of the things that always impressed me most was the voice of a speaker, regardless of the environment and the audience. So make sure during a brief test, you can also self-test yourself for any video call. You can, for any of the popular video applications, you can go to that platform and self-test your audio, see how you sound, hear how you sound, see how you look like, and then you have prepared yourself fully to participate to any international meeting, except of course for your content that remains the responsibility of the individual speaker and presenter. But those would be my guidelines to be fully prepared for international meetings.
Okay. Just to go a little bit deeper in that, are there some cultural things that you have noticed in your career that speakers should be aware of when talking internationally to an international audience? Things that we here in Flanders say on stage without harm. I think about humor, but that you have noticed in an international context that are not so appropriate, to call it that way.
Well, it also depends on the audience you speak for. And you've already mentioned it in some environments, mainly institutional meetings and diplomatic meetings. It is, of course, if you have several languages, it is not advisable to use jokes or linguistic puns or anecdotes, because you never know how that lands in Finnish, for instance, if it starts in English and how that comes out in French. So many linguistic joke, for instance, will sound completely different in another language, because language is another culture. It's not because you reproduce the words and the meaning that it will have the same impact or effect that when you use it in the same language. So, for instance, to make this practical, in the European institutions, it is actually part of the guidelines that a speaker should avoid telling jokes or using linguistic puns, because there are so many languages and it may come out differently in another language, and they don't want to see that in international relationships, of course. So there it is actually not done if you would use that, let's say, type of creativity in your language when you deliver a presentation. Another recommendation would be pronouncing the figures and names correctly, because not everyone has the names and figures on paper. And then, of course, it's very, especially for scientific reports. For instance, if I say 90 or 19, I'm now articulating this very well, but in the speed of the delivery, sometimes it is unnoticed. And then, of course, nobody knows, was it 90 or was it 19? So this is where it's part of the guidelines for the international institutions, but basically for every international speaker, articulate your figures, names, products, and proper names very well, because it will be difficult otherwise for the audience to understand what was actually meant. And it would be a pity if that information would be lost. And a third recommendation would be when we speak of the speech and the speed and acceleration in speech, my guideline is always that speakers and presenters should use their natural speaking rhythm. Now, it's dangerous to say that to some speakers, because some speakers have a natural speaking rhythm that is extremely fast. But the worst case scenario I would absolutely dissuade from applying is that you would read your paper at reading speed. This is the worst case scenario you absolutely need to avoid in all cases, because this is detrimental not only for the performance of those who have to interpret you, but also for the listeners, because they will notice that you're reading aloud from a document at reading speed. And my recommendation is use your natural speaking rhythm, not too fast, but not too slow. Because if you speak too slow, like I'm doing right now, then it's extremely difficult for the listeners and interpreters to see the structure and the message. And of course, it's key that you understand the message and also the way the message is delivered. And you cannot do that by fragmenting or by cutting it in different pieces by speaking too slow. So people don't have to speak too slow. They just have to use their natural rhythm and make sure they articulate very well, especially the figures and the nouns.
Yes, that's all very valuable information for the people who watch and listen to this. I want to go a little bit deeper into this also, because I noticed it's not maybe in big corporations and European institutions, the simultaneous translation is used a lot. Personally, I've been to the big event back in the days with Zig Ziglar, who came to Düsseldorf to talk in the messe for 20,000 people, and that was with simultaneous translation. I feel often that it would be appreciated if there would have been simultaneous translation. Can you, as a professional, explain to our listeners what the benefits are to have a simultaneous translation in any meeting with international people?
Yes, a very good question. The added value of simultaneous interpreting. Let me give you a few examples. It is often said that the added value of any service lies in the removal of pain or bringing pleasure to, in this case, to an audience. And if we speak of simultaneous translation, then of course you have to ask yourself, what is the value creation? Now, it used to be seen sometimes as a necessary evil for the on-site meetings we used to have before the health crisis, with big conferences and congresses where everybody would meet in one physical location, and you would have the odd speaker, one or two speakers who would use another language for whom you actually have to provide simultaneous interpreting. But then, of course, the added cost relates to one or two speakers. That is where you remove the pain for those speakers, especially if they are representative for their sector and for their audience, which is usually the case, of course, in international congresses or conferences. A second reason, and now I'm talking about the pleasure it can bring, the potential, the benefits, is that even for one professional speaker, if you speak for a local audience, it is usually limited in numbers. If you want to reach international audiences, like, for instance, the Brazilian market, or Mexico, or South America, those are big audiences that you can include by simply providing those extra channels of Latin American English and Brazilian Portuguese. And this opens up to so many audiences that you can include in your story, and also deliver your message to those audiences and those geographies you wouldn't otherwise be in without simultaneous interpreting. And a third example is what is being applied by the gaming industry. Before they used native voiceover, so in a foreign language, they noticed that their business could be multiplied if they applied the simultaneous translation in the comments of the gaming sector, but also professional speakers who used to speak for local audiences only. They see the potential of multiplying their audience simply by adding those extra channels, because you cannot speak in 4 or 5 global languages at the same time, now can you? So this is a good potential to open up and to scale up your business also as an individual professional speaker. You don't need to be a multinational company. You have an audience and you want to scale up your audience internationally. This is where the simultaneous interpreting can be a big leverage and a big scale up of your existing speaking business.
That's very interesting, because most people have it in the back of their head. This would have been a nice, if I'm here in front of 1,000, 2,000 people, it would have been nicer if everybody understood me very well, because especially in countries like you said, Spanish language countries, Italian language countries, not everybody understands English always that well. And then it's very good that they can have a headset and listen to it in their own language and understand, really grasp everything that you have to say. So I really commend you on that. And I'm happy now that I have learned to know you and a company that can provide this worldwide, because if I'm right, you're working internationally, yes?
Yes, the client portfolio I mentioned is completely based on international meetings, international multilingual meetings. But again, it can also be for speakers who want to scale up their audience. But indeed, so where we used to have the on-site meeting, we now also have the biggest requests for hybrid and online meetings. So where you used to have the big conferences, now they work with connected rooms and also a combination of people following the meetings online. And this is basically the same persona, the same type of client that we work for today. And that means international organizations, small scale or large scale.
Okay, most interesting. This is a video for PSA Belgium, Professional Speakers Association. You remember now since a few years. Why should somebody involved in speaking become a member of our organization, in your opinion?
Well, perhaps first of all, I will tell you my own story and experience, how I came to be a member of the Professional Speaking Association. And I actually met one of your senior members who was providing coaching in public speaking. And I participated to one of those courses. And I actually discovered during that course that it could be a very interesting opportunity for me to also speak on stage on the business of language. And not only the language of business, but also the business of language. And this is where I became very curious and interested in the profession. So even if my background was that of a conference interpreter, using my voice differently as a speaker, it was actually one of the members of Professional Speaking Association that introduced me to the business by giving a coaching sessions where you learn all the ins and outs of the profession. And this is basically how I got intrigued by the association. And this is also my recommendation to people who want to join a professional speaking organization. Go to one of the informative sessions, and there you learn about the ins and outs of the profession, what it can bring to you, and what opportunities lie ahead as a professional speaker.
That's interesting. Thank you for this recommendation. Professional Speakers Association also has multiple events. I know you're an eager participant of the event of the Professional Speakers Association. how do you experience the networking possibilities at PSA Belgium?
Well, first of all, knowing who is who in the professional speaking world is always interesting because every speaker has their own favorite topics. So mine is language and psycholinguistics, and other speakers will have completely different topics, favorite topics, pet topics. For instance, for HR, mindset, life coaching, what have you. And then, of course, you get to know their expertise. You know how they approach their field of expertise. You share experiences. You give tips to each other. And this is, for me, the value of networking in professional speaking associations. You know who is who. You learn from their topics. You learn how to perform better, to get better. You interact with peers in your own industry. And that is the value of networking in any professional speaking organization.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'm running out of questions. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add to this interview for the listener, viewer who discovered PSA Belgium or Master Voice for that matter.
Well, I would end with a message to all the professionals that use their voice to also be part of a community where you can learn, improve, and where you can interact to give the best of yourself as a speaker, and by using your voice to express yourself in the best possible way. And this is where we all contribute to the global dialogue. So that would be the main mission I would like to end with. Thank you.
Thank you very much.